From violent outbursts to cruel pranks, from scandalous affairs to downright abuse of power, these royals prove that blue blood doesn't equal good behavior. So grab your tea and biscuits, because we're about to spill the royal tea on 14 British royal family members who were the biggest jerks in real life. 1. King Henry VIII, starting strong with probably the most infamous jerk in royal history. King Henry VIII. Now you might know him as the king who had 6 wives. But let me tell you, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to his terrible behavior. Henry didn't just divorce his wives, he had 2 of them beheaded. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard both lost their heads, literally, because Henry decided he was done with them. Imagine being so much of a jerk that you execute your own wives. And it wasn't even about real crimes. Anne Boleyn was almost certainly innocent of the charges against her. Henry just wanted her gone so he could move on to wife number 3. But his cruelty didn't stop there. When the Pope refused to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry threw the ultimate tantrum. He broke away from the Catholic Church and created the Church of England, just so he could get his way. Talk about a power move, but also incredibly selfish. Henry also ordered the execution of his trusted advisor, Thomas More, simply because More wouldn't support his divorce. This was a man who had served him faithfully for years. Henry's response to disagreement: off with their heads. As he got older, Henry became increasingly paranoid, obese, and cruel. His leg ulcers made him irritable, and he took it out on everyone around him. He would order executions on a whim, and his court lived in constant fear. By the end of his reign, Henry had become such a tyrant that people were genuinely relieved when he died. His behavior was so extreme that historians still debate whether he had a personality disorder or brain damage from a jousting accident. Either way, Henry VIII was a certified royal jerk. 2. King George IV. If Henry VIII was cruel, King George IV was just plain selfish and disgusting. This guy took self-indulgence to a whole new level, and trust me, the list of his terrible behavior is long. First off, George was incredibly vain and spent ridiculous amounts of money on himself while his people were suffering. He spent the equivalent of millions on his wardrobe, his palaces, and his parties. Meanwhile, Britain was dealing with serious economic problems after the Napoleonic Wars. Did George care? Absolutely not. He just kept spending and spending, earning himself the nickname the First Gentleman of Europe, which sounds fancy but was actually sarcastic. His treatment of his wife, Caroline of Brunswick, was absolutely horrible. George was forced into the marriage and hated Caroline from the moment he met her. At their wedding, he was so drunk he could barely stand. Nice start, right? He then proceeded to humiliate her publicly for years, having affairs left and right while treating her like trash. When he became king, he actually tried to divorce her and strip her of her title, putting her through a public trial that was basically a humiliation ritual. George was also incredibly lazy. As Prince Regent, he was supposed to help run the country while his father, King George III, was dealing with a mental illness. Instead, George threw parties, ate excessively. He became enormously obese and generally lived for pleasure while ignoring his responsibilities. By the time he died, George IV was so unpopular that the Times newspaper wrote that there never was an individual less regretted by his fellow creatures than this deceased king. Ouch. But honestly, he deserved it. George IV was a selfish, cruel, and irresponsible jerk who put his own pleasure above everything else. 3. Princess Margaret. Moving into the 20th century, let's talk about Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister, who had a reputation for being difficult, demanding, and downright rude. Margaret was born into incredible privilege, and boy, did she act like it. She had a famous temper and would throw fits when things didn't go her way. Staff members at various royal residences dreaded working with her because she was known for her cutting remarks and impossible demands. One famous story involves Margaret at a dinner party where she stubbed out her cigarette in someone's food simply because she was annoyed. She would regularly keep people waiting for hours, believing that as a princess, she could do whatever she wanted. Punctuality, not for Princess Margaret. Her treatment of staff was particularly awful. She expected people to curtsy and bow even in informal settings, and would snap at anyone who didn't follow royal protocol to the letter. A silver. Former employees have described her as capricious and cruel, sometimes nice but often mean for no apparent reason. She once made a footman stand still while she used his hand as an ashtray. Yes, you read that right. She extinguished her cigarette on someone's hand. Margaret also had a reputation for embarrassing her sister, the Queen, with her wild behavior. Her numerous affairs, heavy drinking, and party lifestyle were constantly making headlines. While she wanted all the privileges of being royal, she resented the responsibilities that came with it. In her later years, Margaret became increasingly bitter and difficult. She felt overshadowed by her sister and took it out on those around her. While she had her charming moments, Princess Margaret's reputation as a demanding, sometimes cruel person is well documented by those who knew her. 4. King Edward VIII. Here's a royal who was not only a jerk, but also had some seriously troubling beliefs. King Edward VIII is famous for abdicating the throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson, but that romantic story has a much darker side. First, let's talk about Edward's Nazi sympathies. Yes, you heard that right. Edward and Wallis visited Nazi Germany in 1937, met with Hitler, and Edward was photographed giving Nazi salutes. Documents revealed after the war showed that Hitler planned to reinstall Edward as a puppet king if Germany won World War II, and Edward may have been open to this idea. Imagine a British king who sympathized with the Nazis during World War II. Edward's treatment of his own family was also terrible. When he abdicated in 1936, he essentially abandoned his responsibilities and left his shy, unprepared younger brother to become King George VI. This caused George enormous stress and anxiety. Edward then spent years demanding money from the royal family and complaining that he wasn't being treated well enough, despite having chosen to leave. His relationship with Wallis Simpson, while portrayed as romantic, was actually pretty toxic. Edward was obsessed with her to an unhealthy degree, and she often treated him dismissively. But Edward's real jerk behavior came out in how he constantly criticized the royal family, gave interviews attacking them, and seemed to have zero loyalty to his country or family. Staff members who worked for the Duke and Duchess of Windsor described them as demanding, cheap, despite their wealth, and often cruel. They treated servants poorly and had explosive arguments. Edward's betrayal of his country during its darkest hour, combined with his selfish behavior throughout his life, makes him one of the most controversial royals in history. 5. Prince Andrew, Duke of York. Now we're getting into more recent history, and does Prince Andrew deserve a spot on this list? The scandals surrounding him have been so serious that he's been essentially removed from royal duties. Let's start with his general behavior before the really big scandal. Andrew had a reputation for being arrogant, demanding, and rude. Staff nicknamed him the Rude Duke because of how poorly he treated people. He would allegedly yell at employees, make impossible demands, and generally act like people existed to serve him. Former protection officers and palace staff have shared stories about his difficult behavior. Andrew was also known for his extravagant lifestyle, which he expected taxpayers to fund. He demanded luxury accommodations when traveling and threw fits when things weren't up to his standards. His sense of entitlement was legendary even among royals. But the really serious issues came with his association with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew maintained a friendship with Epstein even after Epstein's first conviction, and there are photographs of them together. Virginia Giuffre accused Andrew of inappropriate behavior when she was 17, claims which Andrew denied, but which led to a civil lawsuit. Andrew's response to these allegations was to give a disastrous interview to BBC Newsnight, where he came across as lacking empathy and made bizarre excuses, claiming he couldn't sweat, for instance. The interview was so bad that it essentially ended his royal career. In 2022, Andrew settled the civil lawsuit out of court, paying a significant sum, though admitting no liability. The Queen stripped him of his military titles and royal patronages. Today, Andrew lives in relative disgrace, a fallen royal whose behavior and associations have damaged the monarchy's reputation significantly. 6. Queen Victoria's son, Prince Albert Edward. Before he became King Edward VII, Prince Albert Edward, known as Bertie, was basically the original royal party boy, and a pretty big jerk to his wife and family. Bertie's mother, Queen Victoria, thought he was irresponsible and stupid, which created a terrible relationship between them. But instead of trying to prove her wrong, Bertie just leaned into the playboy lifestyle. He had numerous affairs throughout his marriage to Princess Alexandra of Denmark, and he didn't even try to hide them. One of his most famous mistresses was Lily Langtry, an actress. Bertie would openly attend theater performances to see her, basically humiliating his wife publicly. And Lily was just one of many. Historians estimate Bertie had dozens of affairs throughout his life. His wife, Alexandra, knew about these affairs but was expected to just put up with them because, well, he was a prince. Bertie's behavior caused several scandals. He was even called to testify in court during a divorce case because he'd been involved with the woman in question. Imagine a future king of England having to appear in court because of his affairs. The Victorian public was shocked, though Bertie didn't seem to care much. He was also incredibly self-indulgent, spending huge amounts of money on gambling, food, he was quite obese, and entertainment. While he waited decades to become king, he basically just partied and enjoyed himself, showing little interest in preparing for his future role. When his father, Prince Albert, died in 1861, Queen Victoria blamed Bertie, believing that stress over Bertie's behavior had contributed to Albert's death. This created an even worse relationship between mother and son. But again, Bertie didn't really change his behavior. Surprisingly, when Bertie finally became King Edward VII at age 59, he was actually a decent king. But for most of his life, he was a selfish, unfaithful jerk who treated his wife terribly. 7. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. Wait, Princess Anne? Yes, hear me out. While Anne is actually respected now for her work ethic and no-nonsense attitude, she definitely had a reputation for being difficult and rude, especially in her younger years. Anne has always been known for her sharp tongue and her refusal to suffer fools gladly. While this can be admirable, it's also led to some pretty jerky behavior over the years. She's been described as abrupt, dismissive, and sometimes downright rude to people she considers beneath her attention. There are numerous stories from journalists and photographers who've encountered Anne's temper. She's famous for telling photographers to naff off and has made it clear she has little patience for the media. While many people can sympathize with not wanting to be photographed constantly, Anne's rudeness goes beyond just protecting her privacy. Staff and palace workers have described Anne as demanding and very particular about how things should be done. Unlike some royals who try to be friendly with staff, Anne maintains strict formality and expects everything to be done exactly her way. She's not abusive, but she's certainly not warm or easy to work with. Anne has also been involved in some controversies, like when her dog attacked 2 children in Windsor Great Park in 2002. She was prosecuted and fined, and the incident showed a somewhat dismissive attitude toward the situation. However, it's worth noting that Anne's reputation has improved significantly over the years. She works harder than almost any other royal, carrying out hundreds of engagements per year, and she does it without complaint. Her direct, no-nonsense style, which seemed rude when she was younger, now seems refreshing in an age of over-polished royals. So while young Anne could definitely be a jerk, older Anne has earned respect for her dedication and authenticity. Still, she makes this list for her historically sharp tongue and difficult reputation. 8. King Charles II. Known as the Merry Monarch, King Charles II might seem like he was just a fun-loving king, but his behavior was actually pretty irresponsible and selfish, making him a bit of a royal jerk. Charles II is famous for having at least 12 acknowledged illegitimate children with various mistresses, and probably more that weren't acknowledged. While his wife, Catherine of Braganza, remained childless, Charles was busy fathering children with women all over his court. He didn't even try to be discreet about it. He would openly keep mistresses, give them apartments at court, and shower them with money and titles. One of his most famous mistresses was Nell Gwynn, an actress. While Charles's relationship with Nell is often portrayed as charming in history books, think about what it meant for his wife. Catherine had to watch her husband publicly carrying on with other women while she remained childless and therefore useless in the eyes of the court. Charles showed her little respect and made no effort to hide his affairs. Charles was also financially irresponsible. He spent huge amounts of money on his mistresses, his pleasures, and his court entertainment, while England was dealing with serious issues like the Great Plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of London in 1666. When the country needed strong leadership, Charles was often more interested in his own enjoyment. His treatment of his brother James, later James II, was also questionable. Charles tried to exclude James from the succession because James was Catholic, causing a political crisis. While this might have been politically motivated, it still showed Charles willing to betray family for convenience. Charles also could be vengeful. He ordered the exhumation and posthumous execution of some of the men who had signed his father's death warrant, having their bodies hanged in chains. Yes, he literally executed dead bodies. That's next-level vindictiveness. While Charles II is remembered fondly in some ways, his selfish behavior and treatment of those around him definitely earn him a spot on this list. 9. Queen Charlotte. Queen Charlotte, wife of King George III, is having a moment right now thanks to the Netflix series Bridgerton and its spin-off, Queen Charlotte. But the real Queen Charlotte had a reputation for being difficult, controlling, and sometimes cruel. Charlotte was known for being extremely strict about court etiquette and protocol. She insisted on formal behavior at all times and would publicly humiliate anyone who didn't follow rules perfectly. Ladies at court were expected to stand for hours in her presence without sitting, even elderly women. If someone broke protocol, Charlotte would make biting comments that left people in tears. She was also incredibly controlling of her daughters. Charlotte and George III had 15 children, and Charlotte kept her 6 surviving daughters under her thumb well into their adulthood. She sabotaged their romantic prospects because she didn't want them to marry and leave her. As a result, most of her daughters remained unmarried and lived sad, restricted lives, essentially prisoners of their mother's neediness. One daughter, Princess Sophia, secretly had an illegitimate child, probably because she had so few opportunities for normal relationships thanks to her mother's control. Charlotte's obsessive control over her daughters' lives was cruel, even by the standards of the time. Charlotte was also known for being very conscious of rank and hierarchy. She treated people she considered beneath her with coldness and sometimes open contempt. She was particularly unwelcoming to new members of the royal family, making them feel like outsiders. When her husband, King George III, began showing signs of mental illness, Charlotte's behavior toward him was complex. While she cared for him in some ways, she also used his condition to gain more power and control. Some historians suggest she may have been unnecessarily harsh during his periods of illness. To be fair, Charlotte lived in difficult times and dealt with a lot of stress, including her husband's illness and the loss of several children. But her controlling, harsh behavior toward those around her, especially her daughters, makes her a definite jerk by modern standards. 10. King James II. King James II managed to be such a jerk that he got kicked off the throne after just 3 years. That takes a special kind of terrible behavior. James's biggest problem was his absolute refusal to compromise or listen to anyone. When he became king in 1685, England was Protestant, but James was Catholic and determined to bring Catholicism back. Instead of being diplomatic about it, he bulldozed ahead, appointing Catholics to important positions, dismissing Parliament when it opposed him, and generally acting like a tyrant. James also showed terrible judgment in how he treated people. He was vindictive toward anyone who opposed him. After the Monmouth Rebellion in 1685, an attempt to overthrow him, James allowed the infamous Bloody Assizes, where Judge Jeffreys executed hundreds of rebels and transported hundreds more to the colonies as slaves. The trials were barely legitimate, and the punishments were excessive even by 17th century standards. His treatment of his own family was also questionable. James had tried to get his brother Charles II to exclude Parliament and rule as an absolute monarch, showing that he had authoritarian tendencies early on. When he became king, he ignored the concerns of his daughters, Mary and Anne, who were Protestants and worried about his policies. James was also stubborn to the point of stupidity. When it became clear that the country was turning against him, he refused to moderate his positions. When his son-in-law, William of Orange, invaded England in 1688, most of James's supporters abandoned him. Even his own daughter Anne turned against him. Instead of fighting or negotiating, James just fled to France, essentially abandoning his kingdom. After losing his throne, James tried twice to invade and reclaim it, leading to wars that caused significant death and suffering. His stubborn refusal to accept reality and his tyrannical behavior during his brief reign make him one of the most unpopular monarchs in British history. 11. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's husband for over 70 years, was known for his gaffes. But let's be honest, many of his comments weren't just mistakes, they were downright rude and offensive. Philip had a reputation for making racist, sexist, and generally inappropriate comments throughout his long public life. In 1986, he told British students in China that they would get slitty eyes if they stayed there too long. When meeting Indigenous Australians, he asked if they still threw spears at each other. He asked a Scottish driving instructor, "How do you keep the natives off the booze long enough to get them through the test?" These weren't just a few isolated incidents. There are literally hundreds of recorded examples of Philip saying offensive things. He asked a woman in 2009, "Are you a woman?" because she was wearing a tie. He told a group of deaf children standing near a Caribbean steel drum band, "Deaf. If you're near there, no wonder you are deaf." While some people found Philip's bluntness refreshing and argued he was just joking, many of his comments crossed the line from cheeky into genuinely offensive. The people on the receiving end of these comments often looked uncomfortable or hurt, even if they laughed politely because he was royalty. Philip was also known for his temper. He had explosive arguments with the Queen, though their marriage was generally solid. Staff members described him as demanding and sometimes intimidating, though most also said he could be charming when he wanted to be. His treatment of his son Charles has also been criticized. Philip was a tough, military-minded man who seemed disappointed in his more sensitive son. He allegedly bullied Charles during his childhood and teenage years, contributing to Charles's insecurities. To be fair to Philip, he also did a lot of good work, particularly with his Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. But his decades of offensive comments and sometimes harsh behavior definitely earn him a place on this list. 12. King William I, known as the Sailor King. William IV was crude, undignified, and often behaved more like a drunken sailor than a monarch, which makes sense since he was a sailor before becoming king. William had a reputation for being vulgar and inappropriate. He would tell dirty jokes in public, spit in public, yes, really, and generally behave in ways that shocked the dignified court society. When he became king at age 64, people hoped he would settle down and become more dignified. Instead, he just brought his crude behavior to the throne. One particularly awful aspect of William's character was how he treated his longtime partner, Dorothea Jordan. They weren't married, but lived together for 20 years and had 10 children together. William seemed to genuinely love her, until he decided he needed to marry a proper princess to have legitimate heirs. He dumped Dorothea cruelly, cutting off her finances and separating her from some of her children. She died in poverty a few years later, while William lived in luxury. Talk about being a jerk. William was also known for his temper. He would get into shouting matches at court, sometimes over trivial matters. He once got into a public argument with his brother's widow, which was considered extremely undignified for a king. His political judgment was also terrible. He dismissed the government in 1834 in a move that was controversial and arguably unconstitutional. He tried to block the Reform Act of 1832 until he was forced to back down. His stubborn, erratic behavior made governing difficult. William also had a nasty habit of holding grudges. He banned his sister-in-law, the Duchess of Kent, Queen Victoria's mother, from court because he didn't like her. At his last birthday dinner, he publicly insulted her in front of everyone, saying he hoped to live long enough to prevent her from becoming regent. Classy, right? While William meant well and wasn't actively cruel like some monarchs, his crude behavior, bad judgment, and particularly his terrible treatment of Dorothea Jordan make him a royal jerk. 13. King George II. King George II had a terrible temper, treated his family horribly, and seemed to enjoy making people miserable. Definitely jerk material. George's relationship with his own father, George I, was so bad that they literally banned each other from their respective courts. This feuding set the pattern for George's entire life. When he became king, he proceeded to have an equally terrible relationship with his own son, Frederick, Prince of Wales. The two hated each other so much that George reportedly said he would have his son arrested if he could find a legal way to do it. When Frederick died, before his father, George barely mourned him. Imagine hating your own son that much. George's treatment of his wife, Queen Caroline, was also awful. Despite the fact that she was intelligent and helped him rule effectively, George openly kept mistresses and humiliated Caroline publicly. He was crude about his affairs, making no effort to hide them from his wife or court. When Caroline became seriously ill in 1737, George showed some emotion, but he'd spent decades treating her poorly before that. George had an explosive temper and would fly into rages over small things. He once kicked his wig across the room in anger. He would yell at his servants, ministers, and even members of his family. Court life was tense because nobody knew when George would explode next. He was also stubborn and often dismissed good advice because he didn't like being told what to do. This made governing with him difficult, and several of his ministers found him nearly impossible to work with. George's redeeming quality was that he was brave in battle. He was the last British monarch to personally lead troops in combat at the Battle of Dettingen in 1743. But his terrible temper, awful treatment of his family, and generally difficult personality make him one of the jerkier monarchs in British history. 14. Princess Augusta Sophia. Princess Augusta Sophia might not be as famous as some others on this list, but this daughter of King George III had a reputation for being difficult, bitter, and sometimes cruel. Augusta was one of the daughters kept under the tight control of her mother, Queen Charlotte, and this made her increasingly bitter as she aged. Unlike some of her sisters who resigned themselves to their restricted lives, Augusta became angry and took it out on those around her. She was known for having a sharp tongue and would make cutting remarks that left people feeling hurt and humiliated. Staff members at court dreaded serving her because she was demanding, critical, and never satisfied with anything. She would complain constantly about her food, her accommodations, and the people around her. Augusta also became involved in various court dramas and feuds. She would gossip maliciously about other members of the royal family and seemed to enjoy stirring up trouble. Her relationship with some of her siblings was strained because of her difficult personality. As she got older, Augusta became increasingly isolated and miserable, which only made her behavior worse. She was known for her hypochondria. She constantly believed she was ill and demanded attention and special treatment. While some of her health complaints may have been real, many people believe she exaggerated them for sympathy and attention. One particularly unpleasant aspect of Augusta's character was her treatment of servants. She would fly into rages over minor mistakes and was known to be verbally abusive. Unlike some royals who at least tried to be kind to staff, Augusta seemed to view them as barely human. Augusta's life was undoubtedly difficult. Her controlling mother, her inability to marry and have her own life, and her restricted existence would make anyone bitter. But her response to these difficulties was to make everyone around her miserable too, which definitely makes her a jerk. She spent her later years alone and unhappy, which is sad but partly the result of her own difficult behavior. What do you think? Did any of these royal jerks surprise you? Do you think there are others who should have made the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our content.